the family meeting my parents called to finalize the arrangement. My father folded his hands and said, "We're all agreed then. Alina signs the house over to Marcus and his family, and she can find herself an apartment. It's the right thing to do, he has children, and she's alone." 14 relatives nod at me, warm and expectant, waiting for me to be the good daughter one last time. And I set a document in the middle of the table and said, "Before I sign anything, I think everyone should actually read the deed, because there's a name on it, and it isn't the one you all assume." Let me back up. Because a moment like that is the end of a very long road. And to understand why I let 14 people believe I was about to hand over my home, you have to understand the year that led there and the lifetime before it. And the two things my family never bothered to check. My name is Alina Vasquez. I'm 38 years old, and my family spent a year running a campaign to guilt me out of my own house, the house I bought that I paid for. That is mine, because my brother needed it more, and because I was the one they'd always been able to move with guilt. This is the story of how they almost succeeded, and the two facts that saved me, and what it cost to finally stop being the family's designated giver. Let me tell you about my family, because the shape of it is the whole engine of what happened. I grew up the responsible one. You've heard this before, maybe, because it's the most common shape a family like mine takes. One child who is a well, and one child who is a bucket, and the well spends its life being lowered into for the bucket. My younger brother, Marcus, was the bucket. The charming one, the struggling one, the one whose problems were always urgent and always everyone's job. And I was the well, the one who was fine, who didn't need much, who always landed on her feet, which in my family was code for the one we can take from because she won't make a fuss. I learned this arithmetic young. When Marcus needed something, the family mobilized. When I needed something, I was reminded how capable I was, how self-sufficient, how I didn't need coddling the way Marcus did. I got the message, the way children always do, and I built my entire personality around it. I would be so competent, so undemanding, so reliable that no one would ever have cause to be disappointed in me. I would earn love by needing nothing. It's a common strategy for the overlooked child. It works in the sense that it keeps the peace. It fails in the sense that it teaches everyone, including you, that your needs don't count, and I did land on my feet. That's the irony that would eventually become the trap. I built a good life through sheer relentless effort. I became a dental hygienist, steady work, good money, and I saved with the discipline of someone who learned early that no one was coming to rescue her. And in my early 30s, I did the thing I was proudest of in my whole life. I bought a house. It wasn't a grand house. A small 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, a fixer-upper I got at a good price because it needed work. But it was mine. I made the down payment from a decade of careful saving. I signed the mortgage. I put my name alone, on the deed. And over the next few years, I fixed it up myself, weekends and evenings, learning as I went, until the house that had been a wreck became a home, my home, the first thing in my life that was entirely and only mine. I want you to hold on to how much that house meant, because my family never understood it, and their failure to understand it is the heart of this story. To them, the house was an asset, a resource, like everything I had, that could be redirected to Marcus if Marcus needed it. To me, the house was proof that the overlooked daughter, the well everyone lowered buckets into, had built something for herself. It was the physical evidence that I mattered, that my effort counted, that I was not just a resource for other people's needs. It was my whole sense of self, made of brick and drywall and the sweat of 100 weekends. Now let me tell you about the year the campaign began, and how it began, because it began the way these things always do, with a real problem, wrapped around a false solution. Marcus, at 35, hit a genuine rough patch. I won't pretend it wasn't real. He lost his job, his marriage strained, he had 2 young children and a lease he couldn't afford, and he was genuinely in trouble. And I want to be clear, I love my brother and I wanted to help him, and I did help him. I gave him money. I watched his kids. I did what family does when family is in trouble, but my family didn't want help for Marcus. They wanted a solution, and the solution they landed on, the solution that made a terrible kind of sense given the arithmetic we'd all been raised inside, was my house. It started as a suggestion, floated gently by my mother. "You know, Alina, that house is so big for just you, and Marcus with those 2 little ones crammed into an apartment." I deflected it the first time. It seemed absurd, but my mother is patient and my family is a machine, and the suggestion came back. And back in each time, it came back a little more solid until it had hardened from amusing into an expectation, and I hadn't agreed to anything, but somehow the family had begun speaking about it as a plan. The plan was this: I would give Marcus my house. Sign it over, or sell it to him for a nominal sum, or simply move out and let him live there. The exact mechanism shifted depending on who was describing it, but the core was constant. I would give up the home I'd built so that Marcus and his children could have it, because he needed it more because he had kids, and I was alone because that's what family does. Because I was the well, and he was the bucket, and the well had produced something, and the bucket needed it. And here is how the guilt machine worked, because the guilt was the whole weapon, and I want anyone who's ever been inside a machine like this to recognize its gears. Every time I resisted, the family had a response calibrated to make resistance feel like cruelty. And I said the house was mine. I'd worked for it. My mother would cry and say she never thought she'd raised a daughter who'd choose a house over her own niece and nephew. When I said I'd help Marcus another way, my father would go cold and disappointed, and say he'd expected more generosity from me. And I pointed out that no one was asking Marcus to solve his own problems. I was told I was being harsh, that Marcus was fragile, that I was so much stronger than him and shouldn't hold his struggles against him. Extended family, fed a steady diet of my selfishness, began to treat me with a chill. The aunts and uncles and cousins who'd absorbed the story that Alina had a whole house and wouldn't share it with her struggling brother and his babies. Do you see the structure? Every reasonable thing I said was reframed as a character flaw. My boundary was selfishness. My ownership was greed. My completely rational refusal to give away the largest asset I'd ever built was recast as choosing bricks over children. And it was aimed with precision at the exact wound I'd carried my whole life. The fear of being the disappointing one, the ungenerous one, the one who failed the family, because my family knew, having built me, that guilt was the lever that had always moved me. And it worked. I have to be honest about that because it's the most important part. For most of that year, it worked. I didn't agree, but I was worn down, eroded, spending nights lying awake wondering if I really was selfish, if I really was choosing a house over children, if a good person would just give it up. The machine was very good, and I had been built by it, and I felt myself bending toward the yes I didn't want to give, because giving in had always been how I earned peace and love in that family, and holding firm meant being cast out. Let me tell you about the subplot that changed everything, because I didn't save myself alone. I was saved, in part, by my Aunt Rosa. Aunt Rosa was my father's older sister, and she'd always been at the edges of the family, present but quiet, kind to me in small ways, never quite in the center. And I'd never known why she kept her distance until the year of the campaign, when Rosa took me to lunch, just the two of us, and told me her own story. "They're doing to you," Rosa said, "exactly what they did to me, 40 years ago." And she told me, when Rosa was young, she'd been the responsible one of her generation, the giver, and she'd bought, with her own money, a small plot of land. And the family had decided her younger brother, my grandfather, needed it more, and they'd run the same campaign, the same guilt, the same reframing of her ownership as selfishness. And Rosa, young and eager to be loved, had given it up, signed the land over. She'd spent 40 years watching that brother's family prosper on land that should have been hers, and being thanked for her generosity at every holiday, and slowly understanding that she'd been robbed by people who'd made the robbery feel like her own noble choice. "I give it up because I wanted them to love me," Rosa said. "And they did love me in the way you love a person who's useful. But I never got the land back, and I never got back the person I might have been if I'd kept it. I've watched you your whole life, Alina. I've watched them make you into what they made me, and when I heard about the house, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I let them do it to me. I won't watch them do it to you." Rosa's story did two things. It shattered the guilt, because I could suddenly see the machine clearly, from the outside, running on a woman 2 generations before me. And it hardened something in me, because I could see, in Rosa's 40 years of regret, the exact future the family was building for me. I would give up the house. They would love me for it in the useful way. And I would spend the rest of my life watching Marcus's family prosper in my home, being thanked for my generosity, slowly understanding I'd been robbed by people who'd made me feel like the robbery was my idea. I was not going to become Rosa. And Rosa, God bless her, was not going to let me. But knowing I didn't want to give up the house wasn't enough. Because the family's pressure was relentless, and the guilt was real, and simply saying no had never worked in my family. Saying no just made me the villain and started the machine grinding harder. I needed more than a boundary. I needed the thing that my whole life had taught me was the only thing that could stop this family. I needed the terms to be undeniable, and I needed to reclaim the truth they'd all agreed to ignore. Which brings me to the second thing that saved me, the concrete thing, the thing under the emotional story. Here is what my family had never actually checked in a year of planning to move me out of my house. They had never confirmed that I could be moved out of my house. They'd assumed. They built an entire campaign on the assumption that the house was a thing I could simply be guilted into giving away. That it was, functionally, a family asset with my name on it, transferable by pressure. They had never once considered the actual legal reality of the home I'd bought with my own money and titled in my own name alone. The house was mine. Solely, cleanly, completely mine. My name alone on the deed. My mortgage in my name alone. There was no family claim, no shared ownership, no mechanism by which anyone could compel me to transfer it. The entire year-long campaign had been an attempt to guilt me into voluntarily surrendering a thing that was in every legal sense. And ambiguously and only mine. And the moment I stopped agreeing to feel guilty, their entire scheme had exactly zero power because guilt was the only tool they had. They had no legal claim whatsoever. They had only ever had my willingness to be moved. I sat with that after Rosa's lunch, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a year, solid ground. The family had built a cage out of guilt, and I'd been trapped in it because I'd agreed the guilt was real. But the cage had no floor. The moment I stopped standing on the guilt, there was nothing holding me at all. The house was mine. It had always been mine. All I had to do was stop agreeing to give it away, and there was not one single thing any of them could do about it. But I didn't just want to refuse. I'd learned, watching Rosa's 40 years of regret, that a quiet refusal wasn't enough. The machine would just keep grinding, would keep me the villain, would poison the rest of my life. I wanted to end it, completely, in front of everyone. I wanted to break the machine so thoroughly that it could never grind on me again, and maybe this was Rosa's influence, so that it could never grind on the next overlooked daughter either. So I let them schedule the meeting. Let me tell you about the midpoint, the moment I almost didn't make it, because I want to be honest about how close it came. In the weeks before the meeting, the pressure reached its peak, and there was a night I nearly broke. Marcus came to me directly, not the parents, Marcus himself, and he brought his kids, my niece and nephew, and he sat in my living room, the living room of the house they wanted me to give him, and he cried. And his children played on my floor, and Marcus said, "I don't know what I'm going to do, Alina. I don't know where we're going to go. You're the only one who can save us." And I looked at those two kids on my floor, and the guilt was so enormous, so total, that I nearly said yes right there. I nearly gave away my whole life because two children were playing on my floor and my broken brother was crying. That's how these machines win. They find the one thing you can't say no to, and they put it in front of you, and they let your own love do the work. And I want anyone in a moment like that to hear what pulled me back, because it wasn't cleverness. It was Rose's voice in my head. I gave it up because I wanted them to love me. I never got it back, because I realized, looking at Marcus crying in my house, that Marcus was not actually my responsibility to house. That a grown man with a family had other options he wasn't being asked to pursue. Because the family had decided I was the option, and that if I gave up my home, I would not actually be saving those children. I would be teaching my whole family, one more time, that Alina is the well, and that the well can always be drained, and that a woman's entire life's work can be extracted from her with enough tears. And I would be robbing those very children of the example of an aunt who knew her own worth. So I held, barely, and I let the meeting happen. The meeting. 14 relatives gathered to finalize the arrangement. My parents at the head, Marcus present, the whole extended family assembled to witness the good daughter do the right thing at last. And Aunt Rosa there too, at my request, in the corner, watching, the only person in the room who knew what was coming. My father folded his hands and delivered the summary. We're all agreed then. Alina signs the house over to Marcus and his family, and she finds herself an apartment. It's the right thing to do. He has children, and she's alone. And 14 faces turned to me, warm and expectant, waiting for me to be the good daughter one last time. And I set a document in the middle of the table. Before I sign anything, I said, I think everyone should actually read the deed. Because there's a name on it, and it isn't the one you all assume. I let them look. This house is titled in my name, mine alone. I bought it with a decade of my own savings. I signed the mortgage in my name alone, and I renovated it with my own hands over 3 years of weekends. There's no family claim on it. There's no shared ownership. There's no mechanism, legal or otherwise, by which any of you can compel me to give it to Marcus. For a year, you've all been planning to move me out of a house that is, in every legal sense, unambiguously and only mine. And the only reason that plan ever seemed possible is that you were counting on me feeling too guilty to say what I'm about to say. The room had gone very still. I am not giving Marcus my house, I said. Not signing it over, not selling it for $1, not moving out. It's mine. I built it. And I've spent a year being told that keeping the thing I built makes me selfish, that owning my own home makes me greedy, that refusing to hand my brother my entire life's work makes me a bad person who chooses bricks over children. And I finally understood that none of that is true. It's just the story this family tells to move me, because I've always been the one you could move with guilt. I looked at my mother. You cried and said you never thought you raised a daughter who'd choose a house over her niece and nephew. But you did raise a daughter who'd give up everything for this family's approval. You raised her very deliberately, and it nearly worked one last time. What you never raised was a son you'd asked to solve his own problems, because Marcus has always been the one we protect, and I've always been the one we drain. I'm done being drained. And then I did the thing that broke the machine. I turned to Aunt Rosa. Tell them, Rosa, I said gently. Tell them what they did to you. And Rosa stood up 70 years old, and she told the room the story she'd carried for 40 years. The land, the same campaign, the same guilt. The brother who needed it, more the generosity she was thanked for at every holiday, while she watched her own life prosper in someone else's hands. I gave up my land because they made me feel like keeping it was selfish, Rosa said. The exact words they've been using on Alina. I've spent 40 years regretting it, and I am not going to sit in this room and watch this family do to my niece what it did to me. Alina built that house. It's hers. And every single person who spent this year making her feel like a monster for keeping what's hers should be ashamed. I know I am, for staying quiet about my own robbery for 40 years, until it started happening to her. The room could not absorb it. Because Rosa's story did to the family what it had done to me. It pulled the machine into the light, showed it running across 2 generations, made the pattern undeniable. You could see it land on the faces of the extended relatives, the ones who'd absorbed the story that I was selfish, suddenly recalculating, suddenly seeing that the selfish one had been robbed, and the robbery had a 40-year precedent sitting right there in the corner. Here is how it ended. My father tried, of course, to reassert control, to say this was different, that Marcus really needed it, that I was being manipulated by Rosa's bitterness. But it didn't hold, because the deed was on the table, and the truth was in the room, and Rosa's 40 years were sitting in a chair looking at all of them. The machine runs on everyone agreeing not to look at it directly. Rosa and I had turned on the lights, and in the light, a year-long campaign to guilt a woman out of her own home looked like exactly what it was. I kept my house, obviously. It had always been mine. All I'd ever had to do was stop agreeing to give it away. Marcus and his family found other solutions, because it turned out that when I was no longer available as the solution, other options materialized, the way they always do when a family can no longer default to draining its designated giver. Marcus moved in with our parents temporarily, got back on his feet, found work, found a place. He did the ordinary hard things that people do when they're not being handed someone else's life, and he was fine. He was always going to be fine. The emergency that supposedly required my entire home was, like most such emergencies, solvable by the person whose emergency it actually was. My relationship with my parents changed permanently, and I've made my peace with that. They never fully apologized. They experienced my refusal as a betrayal, the way people do when you stop letting them take from you. But the campaign ended, because campaigns like that require a compliant target, and I was no longer compliant. My mother and I have a cooler, more honest relationship now, built on the new understanding that I am a person with a home and not a resource with a name. It's less warm than before. It's also, for the first time, real. Extended family split, the way they do. Some relatives, shaken by Rosa's story, came to me privately and apologized for how they'd treated me during the year of the campaign. They stayed loyal to the old story, because admitting they'd helped guilt a woman out of her own home was harder than just continuing to think I was selfish. I let the second group go. I'd spent 38 years chasing that group's approval. I was done. And Rosa. Rosa is the great gift of this whole terrible year. The aunt at the edges, the quiet one, who'd carried her own robbery in silence for 40 years, and finally broke that silence to save me from the same fate. We're close now, the two wells the family tried to drain, one who gave in and one who didn't, bound together by the machine we both survived. She told me, not long ago, that speaking up for me had healed something in her that 40 years of silence never could. I couldn't get my land back, she said, but I got to stop it from taking your house. That's 40 years of regret turned into one good thing. I'll take it. So will I. For a year, my family ran a campaign to guilt me out of the home I'd built with my own hands, aimed at the exact wound that spent my whole life cultivating. The fear of being the ungenerous one, the disappointment, the daughter who failed the family. They built a cage out of guilt. And I sat in it for a year because I believed the guilt was real, because I'd been raised to believe my needs came last, and my ownership was negotiable, and my job was to give until there was nothing left. But the cage had no floor. The house was mine. It had always been mine. The deed had my name on it, only my name, and no amount of tears or guilt or family pressure could change what was written there. The only thing holding me in that cage was my own agreement to feel guilty for keeping what I'd earned. The day I stopped agreeing, the cage simply fell away, and I was standing as I always had been in a house that was mine. That no one could take that I'd built myself weekend by weekend out of the stubborn refusal of an overlooked daughter to believe she deserved nothing. They spent a year trying to move me out of my own home. I'd spent a decade making sure they never could. I just had to finally read them the deed and stop being the daughter who'd give away her whole life to be loved by people who only loved what she gave. I kept the house. And I found out that the family who only valued me for what I'd surrender was a family I could survive losing. But the home I built with my own hands, that I could not survive losing. So I didn't. I signed nothing. And I'm still there, in my house, with my name on the deed, the overlooked daughter who finally understood that the well has the right to keep its own water.